My son didn't pick me up from the hospital. So I rented a car and drove myself home. The key wouldn't turn. I stood on my own porch in the rain. My son's voice came through the door. He said the new locks meant I didn't live there anymore. I let the key fall. It hit the wet step and stayed there. I didn't pick it up. I just stood until the cold told me the truth. Then I drove away. And I changed everything. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I left the hospital on a Tuesday. The discharge papers felt thin in my hands. My wrist still wore the hospital band. White paper with my name printed in black. Margaret Whitaker. Birth date. Admit date. Nothing about where to go next. The nurse at the desk asked if someone was picking me up. I told her my son was on his way. She smiled and went back to her computer. I sat in the waiting area for 20 minutes. Then I called Colin. The phone rang 4 times. Voicemail. I called again. He picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice sounded far away. I could hear Brittany laughing in the background. He told me to stop calling every 5 minutes. He said I sounded like a lost dog. Then the line went dead. I sat there holding the phone. The nurse glanced over. I stood up and thanked her. I told her my ride was here. She nodded and looked back at her screen. Outside, the November air bit through my coat. Colorado cold has a dryness that gets inside your bones. The cottonwoods along the parking lot stood bare. The sky looked like old denim. The mountains didn't seem to notice me at all. I rented a car from the lot across the street. The clerk was young and typed without looking up. The sedan smelled like pine cleaner and stale smoke. The seat sat too low. The gearshift stuck when I tried to shift into drive. I adjusted the mirror and saw my face. Tired eyes. Gray hair I hadn't combed that morning. A woman who looked like she'd been erased a little at a time. I turned off the radio. I didn't want music. I wanted to hear myself think. The drive north took 40 minutes. I knew these roads. Harold and I used to drive them on weekends. Sunday mornings to the farmer's market. Saturday afternoons to Colin's soccer games. I remembered making cinnamon rolls before dawn when Colin was small. I remembered pawning my grandmother's bracelet to pay for his first semester. Harold used to read trail maps out loud during thunderstorms. His voice always calmed me. I turned into the subdivision just before noon. The house sat at the end of Maple Court. White siding, blue shutters. A porch light that used to mean home. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment. The curtains in the front window were new. Beige linen. Brittany's taste. I got out and walked to the front door. My key slid into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. The lock had been changed. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. A curtain shifted in the window beside the door. I saw Brittany's face for just a second. Then the curtain fell back. I heard Colin's voice inside. He told me through the door not to bother knocking. He said the new locks meant I didn't live there anymore. His voice sounded flat, empty, like he'd rehearsed the words. I stood on that porch for a long time. The drizzle turned into rain. My coat got heavy. Water dripped off the edge of the roof. The porch light stayed off even though it was getting dark. I didn't knock again. I didn't cry. I just stood there until my hands went numb. Then I walked back to the car. I drove to a motel off I-25. The sign said vacancy in red neon. The room cost $49 a night. The clerk handed me a key attached to a plastic tag. Room 12. The room smelled like old carpet and bleach. The bedspread had a pattern that hurt to look at. The heater rattled but barely worked. I sat on the edge of the bed. I still had my coat on. I didn't cry that night either. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying would have made the room feel smaller. And I needed space to think. I thought about Harold. He died 3 years ago from a tumor that moved fast. Before he got sick, he told me something. He said to keep the house deed in my name. He said to keep the bank accounts separate. He said people could tilt when money was involved. I laughed at him then. I thought he was being paranoid. After he died, Colin and Brittany moved closer. They said they wanted to help. At first it felt like help. Colin mowed the lawn. Brittany organized the kitchen. They said I shouldn't be alone. Then small things started changing. My studio cups disappeared from the shelves. Food containers in the fridge had labels that said household use only. My photos came down from the hallway wall. New pictures went up. Brittany's family. Brittany's friends. I became the soft sound in the background that nobody mentioned. I told Colin once that I felt unsafe. He said I was too sensitive. He said that's not how the world works anymore. I stopped complaining after that. But I didn't stop paying attention. I bought a small camera online. It cost $38. The instructions came in a language I didn't speak. But I figured it out. I mounted it above the bookshelf outside my old room. It was no bigger than a button. I didn't know what it would catch. I just knew I needed it. That night in the motel I made a list. 4 lines. Retrieve the deed from the bank. Call Nora Kaplan. Review the footage. Change everything. I stared at the last line for a long time. Change everything. It felt too big, too final. But I wrote it down anyway. I turned off the light and lay in the dark. The heater rattled. A truck passed on the highway outside. I could hear my own breathing. I thought about the key I'd dropped on the porch. I thought about Colin's voice through the door. I thought about Brittany's face in the window. And I thought about Harold's letter. The one I kept in the safe deposit box. The one that said if I was ever abandoned I had full discretion over everything. I didn't sleep much that night. But I didn't need to. I had work to do. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The motel became my home for 6 days. I learned the pattern of the highway noise. Trucks passed every 20 minutes after midnight. The ice machine down the hall hummed and clicked. The man in room 11 coughed at dawn. I didn't sleep much. But I didn't need to. Sleep felt like a luxury I'd already paid for. On Wednesday morning I drove to the bank. First National on Colfax Avenue. The same bank I'd used for 40 years. The teller recognized my face. She smiled and asked how I was doing. I told her I needed access to my safe deposit box. She nodded and led me to the back. The room was small and windowless. It smelled like metal and old paper. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She left me alone with the box. Box 214. I'd rented it the year Harold and I got married. The key still fit perfectly. Inside were the important things. Birth certificates. The deed to the house. Insurance policies. And Harold's letter. I held the envelope for a long time. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. Harold's letters always leaned to the right. Like they were trying to move forward. I opened it even though I'd read it before. The date at the top was 3 years old. 3 months before he died. He wrote that he knew me too well. He said I would carry on too quietly. He said I would let people take from me. So he left me something that wouldn't be quiet. The amendment was attached, notarized and legal, written with his ranger friend who'd become a county clerk. It said if I was neglected or abandoned by heirs, if I was abused or cast out, I had full discretion to reallocate all assets. Everything: the house, the rental property next door, the land near Lyons, the investment accounts. No names in the document. No accusations. Just a sentence that turned a key. I folded the papers back into the envelope. I put them in my purse. I thanked the teller on my way out. That afternoon I went to see the camera footage. I'd set up the camera to record to a small device, hidden in my old bedroom closet. I'd retrieved it the morning after they locked me out. I'd gone back at dawn when I knew they'd be sleeping. The side door to the garage still used the old lock. I was in and out in 3 minutes. Now in the motel room I plugged it into my laptop. The screen glowed blue and then loaded. Weeks of footage compressed into files. I found October 31st. Halloween night. Colin had told me they'd be out of town that weekend, visiting Brittany's sister in Boulder. He said I'd have the house to myself. The footage said otherwise. The hallway camera showed people arriving at 7. I recognized some of them. Neighbors, Colin's co-workers, Brittany's book club friends. Music played loud enough to rattle the frame. Laughter bounced off the hardwood floors. Then at 7:40 Brittany walked into view. She wore a gray wig. One of my old cardigans. The blue one with the torn pocket. She had a plastic oxygen tube looped around her ears. A broom handle in her hand like a cane. She shuffled down the hallway. Her shoulders hunched. Her mouth hanging open. She pretended to look for something. Patting her pockets. Confused. Lost. People laughed. Someone shouted asking who she was supposed to be. Then Colin stepped into frame. He was filming on his phone. Smiling too wide. He announced it to the room. Maggie the mummy. Still won't die. The room erupted. People doubled over. Someone clapped. Brittany did another lap down the hallway, dragging the broom, muttering nonsense. I watched the whole thing twice. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed even. I just watched. Then I burned the clip to a disk. I labeled it in neat block letters. October 31st, 7:43 p.m. I put it in a paper sleeve. On Thursday I called Ruth Ellison, my neighbor from Maple Court. The one who still waved when she saw me. The one who brought me soup after Harold died. We met at the church garden on Friday morning. The air was cold but the sun was out. Ruth wore her red coat and her reading glasses on a chain. We sat on the bench by the rosebushes. I handed her the disc. I told her what was on it. I told her if anything happened to me she'd know why. Ruth didn't ask questions. She just nodded. She put the disc in her purse. She said she'd keep it safe. Then she hugged me. It was the first time anyone had touched me in weeks. That afternoon I looked up Nora Kaplan. I hadn't seen her in 15 years. She'd been a scholarship student at the community college. Bright and determined. Working 2 jobs. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father had left when she was small. Nora needed a prom dress her senior year. She came into my studio looking for work. Said she could sweep or stack or do anything. I told her I didn't need help. But I did need someone to model a dress. A friend of mine was a seamstress. She'd made something beautiful, emerald green silk. It fit Nora perfectly. I told her to keep it. She cried in my studio. I told her crying wasn't necessary. She graduated top of her class. Got a full ride to law school. Sent me a card every Christmas after that. Now she had an office above a bakery on Larimer Street. The sign outside said Kaplan Legal Services. I called and made an appointment. Saturday morning I drove downtown. The bakery smelled like butter and cinnamon. The staircase to the second floor was narrow and steep. Nora's office was small but organized. Books lined the walls. A wooden desk sat by the window. Nora looked older but the same. Her hair was shorter. She wore glasses now, but her eyes were still sharp. She hugged me when I walked in. She asked how I was. I told her I needed a lawyer. We sat down. I gave her the documents. The deed, Harold's letter, the amendment, the disc, my hospital discharge papers, a journal I'd kept for the past 6 months. She read everything without speaking. It took 20 minutes. Then she stacked the papers neatly. She looked at me. She said we'd file for a protective order first. Then we'd move the assets into a new trust. One that didn't include Colin or Brittany. We'd submit the video as evidence. Ruth's testimony, the hospital records, Harold's letter. She said it wouldn't be easy. But it would be clear. She said clarity was the best weapon. I signed where she told me to. I paid her retainer with a check. She said she'd file everything on Monday. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but direction, like I knew which way to walk. That night I sat in the motel room. The heater rattled. The highway hummed. I made tea in the little coffee maker. It tasted like plastic, but it was hot. I thought about the list I'd made. Retrieve the deed. Call Nora. Review the footage. Change everything. 3 things done. 1 left. I looked out the window at the parking lot. Snow was starting to fall. Light and dry. It wouldn't stick. But it was coming. I thought about Harold. About the way he used to read maps out loud. About the measuring spoon he called our North Star. About the letter he left me. He'd known. Somehow he'd known I would need this. A way out. A door that only I could open. I finished my tea. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark listening to the trucks pass. And I thought about Monday. About court filings and legal language. About words that would become walls. About changing everything. I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Nora filed the papers on Monday morning. I knew because she called me at 10. Her voice was steady and professional. She said the protective order hearing was set for Thursday. 4 days away. She said I should prepare myself. Colin and Brittany would be notified today. They'd know by noon. I thanked her and hung up. I sat on the motel bed holding the phone. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something. Not falling. Just standing. Waiting to see what came next. That afternoon my phone rang. Colin's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. It stopped. Then started again. I turned the phone off. I didn't want to hear his voice. Not his excuses. Not his anger. Not whatever story he'd already started telling himself. On Tuesday I drove out to Lyons. The land Harold had bought sat at the base of the foothills. 15 acres of scrub oak and tall grass. He'd dreamed of restoring it. Native plants. Walking trails. A small cabin for weekends. We'd only been out there twice before he got sick. After that it just sat. Waiting. I parked on the dirt road and walked the fence line. The November wind was sharp. It smelled like pine and cold earth. The mountains rose behind the property. Snow already dusted the peaks. I stood in the middle of the field. The grass came up to my knees. The sky was enormous and blue. I could hear nothing but wind. Harold used to say land remembers. He said it holds what you give it. I didn't know what I'd given this place yet. But I knew it was mine. I stayed for an hour. Then I drove back to the motel. On Wednesday I went to the courthouse. Not for the hearing, just to see it, to know where I'd be standing tomorrow. The building was old brick with white columns. Stone steps led up to heavy wooden doors. Inside it smelled like floor wax and old paper. The kind of smell that makes everything feel official. I found the courtroom on the second floor. Room 204. The door was locked but I could see through the window. Wooden benches. The judge's bench at the front. 2 tables facing it. Flags in the corners. I pictured myself sitting at one of those tables. Nora beside me. Colin and Brittany at the other. I tried to imagine how it would feel. I couldn't, so I stopped trying. That night I didn't sleep at all. I lay in the dark watching the ceiling. The heater cycled on and off. Each time it clicked I counted the seconds until it started again. 93 seconds. Every time. I thought about what Nora had told me. The hearing would be short. Maybe an hour. We'd present evidence. They'd have a chance to respond. The judge would decide. She said the video was strong. The hospital records were clear. Ruth's testimony would matter. Harold's letter gave me legal standing. But she also said judges were human. They had bad days. They made mistakes. Nothing was guaranteed. I got up at 4 in the morning. I made coffee in the little pot. I sat by the window and watched the sky turn gray. At 6 I showered. I dressed in clothes I'd bought at a thrift store. A navy blue skirt. A white blouse. Low heels that didn't hurt my feet. I wanted to look like myself. Not someone pretending. I ate nothing. My stomach felt like a stone. Nora picked me up at 8:30. She drove a silver Honda with a coffee cup in the holder. She wore a dark suit and her hair pulled back. She looked like someone you'd believe. We didn't talk much on the drive. She asked if I was ready. I said I was. She said good. The courthouse parking lot was half full. We walked up the stone steps together. Inside people moved through the lobby. Lawyers with briefcases. Families holding hands. A security guard checking bags. We went through the metal detector. It beeped because of my belt buckle. The guard waved me through anyway. Upstairs we sat on a bench outside the courtroom. Nora reviewed her notes. I watched people walk past. At 9:15 Colin and Brittany arrived. They came from the other end of the hallway. Colin wore a suit I'd never seen. Brittany wore beige, a dress that looked expensive. Their lawyer walked between them. An older man with gray hair and a red tie. They didn't look at me. They walked past like I wasn't there. Like I was furniture. My chest tightened but I didn't move. I just watched them disappear into the courtroom. At 9:30 a bailiff opened the doors. He called the case number. Nora touched my elbow. We stood and walked in. The courtroom looked smaller than it had through the window. The benches were scarred and worn. The judge's bench loomed higher than I'd expected. We sat at the table on the left. Colin and Brittany sat on the right. I could feel them across the room. But I didn't turn to look. The bailiff told us to rise. The judge entered. A woman in her 50s with short dark hair. She sat and told us to sit. She read the case number and the summary. Her voice was clear and unimpressed. Petitioner seeks protective order and asset control. Respondents contest claims. She looked at Nora. She said counsel could proceed. Nora stood. She spoke clearly. She laid out the facts. The discharge from the hospital. The unanswered calls. The changed locks. The refusal of entry. She submitted the hospital records. The nurse's statement. My journal entries. The dates matched. Everything lined up. Then she said she had video evidence. The judge nodded. The bailiff dimmed the lights. A screen lowered from the ceiling. The footage began to play. The hallway. The party sounds. Brittany shuffling into frame. The gray wig. My cardigan. The oxygen tube. The broom handle cane. I watched it again. This time in a room full of strangers. Brittany's exaggerated shuffle. Her slack mouth. Her confused patting of pockets. Then Colin's voice. Maggie the mummy. Still won't die. The laughter that followed. The screen went dark. The lights came back up. The room was silent. No one moved. I heard someone in the gallery whisper. The words sounded like shame. The judge looked at Colin and Brittany. Her face showed nothing. She asked if they had a response. Their lawyer stood. He was smooth and practiced. He said the video showed poor judgment. He called it a private moment. He said humor was subjective. He said his clients regretted any hurt feelings. But he said it didn't constitute abuse. He said the lock was changed for security reasons. He said family disagreements happen. The judge listened without expression. Then Nora called Ruth. Ruth walked to the witness stand. She wore her church dress. Navy with white buttons. Her reading glasses hung on the chain. She swore to tell the truth. Nora asked when she last saw me before the hospital. Ruth said October 20th. I'd looked thin, worried. I'd told her I didn't feel safe in my own home. Nora asked if she'd witnessed anything specific. Ruth said she'd seen me locked out. November 5th. Standing on the porch in the rain. For over 30 minutes. No one answered the door. The judge wrote something down. Their lawyer asked Ruth if she'd actually heard anything. Ruth said no, just saw me standing there. Alone. He sat down looking satisfied. But the damage was done. The judge looked at the papers in front of her. She looked at Colin and Brittany. She asked them directly. She wanted to know about dignity. About care. About what they thought a son owed a mother. Colin started to answer. His voice was defensive. He said relationships were complicated. The judge cut him off. She said the court wasn't interested in complications. Only in facts. She ruled from the bench. No delay. No waiting. Immediate return of property control to me. No contact order for Colin and Brittany. Minimum distance of 500 feet. Damages to be calculated. Court costs assigned to respondents. She banged the gavel once. It was over. We stood. The judge left. Colin and Brittany sat frozen at their table. Brittany's face had gone pale. Colin stared at the wood grain. I didn't look back. I walked out with Nora. In the hallway I finally let myself breathe. My legs felt weak but I kept walking. Nora squeezed my arm. She said it went better than expected. I nodded. I couldn't speak yet. Outside the sun was bright and cold. The steps felt steep going down. At the bottom I stopped. I turned and looked back at the courthouse. The white columns. The flag moving in the wind. I had stood in that building. I had told my truth. And someone had listened. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The locks were changed back on Friday. A locksmith came at 9 in the morning. Nora had arranged it. She handed me 3 new keys on a ring. They were cold and heavy in my palm. I stood on the porch. The same porch where I'd been locked out. The same door that wouldn't open. Now it did. The key slid in smooth. It turned without resistance. The door swung open. I stepped inside. The house smelled different. Not like my house. Like perfume and cleaning products. Like someone else's life. The walls were bare where my photos had hung. Pale rectangles marked where frames used to be. The furniture had been rearranged. Everything looked staged, like a magazine spread. Nothing looked lived in. I walked through slowly. The kitchen first. New curtains, white and crisp. The canisters on the counter weren't mine. The dish towels were monogrammed with a B. I opened the refrigerator. It was nearly empty. A bottle of wine, some yogurt containers, bottled water. Nothing that needed cooking. Nothing that suggested a home. The living room had new throw pillows. Gray and cream. The coffee table had been replaced. Glass instead of wood. A stack of design magazines sat perfectly centered. I climbed the stairs. My old bedroom door was closed. I opened it. The bed was still there. But it had been stripped. The mattress bare. My nightstand was gone. The lamp I'd read by for 20 years. Gone. The closet was empty except for wire hangers. They clinked when I touched them. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress. The house felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of it. I stayed there for a long time. Just sitting, just breathing. Then I stood up. I spent the weekend cleaning. Not the kind of cleaning that makes things shine. The kind that removes, that erases. I took down Brittany's curtains. I packed up the throw pillows. I boxed the design magazines. The monogrammed dish towels. The perfumed candles. All of it went into boxes. I put the boxes in the garage. I didn't throw them away. That felt too angry. I just moved them out of sight. By Sunday night the house looked empty. But it felt more like mine. On Monday I called a nonprofit. Front Range Women's Resilience Collective. I'd read about them in the paper years ago. They ran a shelter for women leaving bad situations. The waiting list was long. Funding was always tight. I asked to speak with the director. Her name was Patricia. She sounded tired but kind. I told her I had a property. A house and a rental unit next door. I wanted to donate them. For the shelter. For women who needed a place. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I was serious. I said I was. We met on Tuesday at a coffee shop. Patricia was younger than I expected. Maybe 50. She wore jeans and a fleece jacket. Her hands were rough like she did physical work. I showed her the deed. The property assessment. Photos of the house and rental. She looked at everything carefully. She asked why I wanted to do this. I told her the short version. My son locked me out. The court gave it back. But I didn't want to live there anymore. A home can't be repaired once certain things happen. The threshold remembers. Patricia nodded like she understood. She said the collective could use it. They had 12 women on the waiting list. Some with children. They needed space desperately. She asked what I wanted in return. I said I wanted a room. Just one. At the back of the house. Somewhere I could set up a pottery wheel. Somewhere I could teach. She smiled. She said that could be arranged. We signed the papers on Wednesday. Nora handled the legal work. The house and rental transferred to the collective. Tax-deductible donation. Clean and simple. The only condition was my room. And that the place would be called Stillwater House. Patricia asked about the name. I told her Stillwater is what you get after the rapids. After the chaos. The quiet that comes after survival. She said it was perfect. By Thursday the first women arrived. 3 of them. Patricia introduced me. Maria was 28 with 2 small children. She'd left with nothing but a backpack. Her arms had bruises she didn't mention. Jennifer was older. Maybe 45. Her husband had controlled all the money. She'd never had her own bank account. And Sarah was 19, barely more than a girl. Her eyes were old in a young face. I showed them the house. The bedrooms upstairs. The kitchen with its big table. The rental unit where Maria and her children could have privacy. They moved through the rooms carefully, like they were afraid to believe it was real. Maria's daughter asked if she could pick which bedroom. I told her yes. She chose the one with the window facing the garden. That first week we learned each other. How to share space. How to be quiet when someone needed it. How to speak up when something mattered. I set up my pottery wheel in the back room. The one that faced what used to be Harold's hydrangeas. Now there were raised garden beds. Patricia said we'd plant vegetables in spring. On Friday afternoon I was working at the wheel, centering a lump of clay. The wheel hummed. My hands pressed and shaped. Sarah knocked on the door frame. She asked if she could watch. I told her to come in. She sat on the stool by the window. She didn't say anything, just watched my hands. After a while I asked if she wanted to try. She looked scared but nodded. I showed her how to wet her hands. How to press down and in at the same time. How to let the clay guide her as much as she guided it. Her first try collapsed. She apologized. I told her apologizing wasn't necessary. I said clay forgives everything. You just start over. Her second try held. Not perfect, but standing. She smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. That night we all ate together. Jennifer had made soup. Nothing fancy, just chicken and vegetables. But the kitchen smelled like a home should. We sat around the table. Maria's children colored with crayons. Sarah cut bread. Patricia stopped by with mail and stayed for coffee. No one talked about what they'd left behind. Not yet. That would come later. For now we just sat together. Passing butter. Pouring water. Learning to be safe. After dinner I went to my room. I sat at the small desk by the window. I started a journal. Not for the court. Not for evidence. Just for myself. I wrote about the day. About Sarah's hands on the clay. About Maria's daughter choosing her room. About the way Jennifer had thanked me for the soup. I wrote about how the house felt different now. Not haunted. Not hollow. Just full in a new way. I looked out the window at the garden. The beds were empty now. Just dark soil and wooden frames. But in spring there would be tomatoes. Lettuce. Herbs. I thought about Harold. About the letter he left. About the amendment that made this possible. He'd known I would need an escape route. He'd built one into the foundation. I thought about Colin. About the Halloween party. About his voice through the door. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy. I felt something quieter. Like closing a book you'll never read again. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark listening to the house. Footsteps upstairs. Water running through pipes. A child's voice asking for one more story. This house was full now. Full of people starting over. Full of second chances, and I was one of them. I closed my eyes. I slept better than I had in months. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally somewhere I belonged. Somewhere no one could lock me out. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. December came with snow that stayed. The garden beds disappeared under white. The windows frosted at the edges. Mornings were dark until almost 7. Stillwater House developed a rhythm. Maria's children left for school at 7:30. Sarah worked the breakfast shift at a diner downtown. Jennifer had started volunteering at the library. Patricia stopped by twice a week with supplies and paperwork. I taught pottery on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Anyone who wanted could come. Some days it was just Sarah. Other days women from other shelters joined us. Patricia had spread the word. We worked in silence mostly. Hands in clay, the wheel turning, the quiet hum of concentration. One Tuesday a new woman arrived. Her name was Linda. She was probably 60. Gray hair pulled back in a bun. Hands that shook slightly when she reached for the clay. She told me she'd never made anything before. Her husband hadn't liked mess. Hadn't liked hobbies. Hadn't liked her doing anything without asking first. I showed her how to wedge the clay. How to push out the air bubbles. She worked it for 10 minutes. Then she looked up at me. She said it felt good to push something. I nodded. I understood. By the end of January we had shelves of work. Bowls. Cups. Small vases. Nothing perfect. Everything honest. I taught them to mark the bottom with their initials. To date each piece. To remember they made something that would last. Linda's first bowl was lopsided. But she glazed it blue. Her favorite color. She said she'd never owned anything blue. Her husband had preferred beige. Sarah made cups. Dozens of them. Each one a little different. She said she liked the repetition. The way you could keep trying. Keep getting better. Maria made a small plate for each of her children. She painted their names in careful letters. She said they'd never had anything with their names on it. Everything had always been secondhand. In February Patricia asked if we'd consider selling some pieces. A local cafe wanted handmade mugs. They'd pay wholesale and give credit to Stillwater House. We voted on it. Everyone said yes. The money would go back into the collective. More supplies. More space. More women helped. The cafe order was for 20 mugs. We made 30, just in case some broke in firing. I loaded the kiln on a Wednesday. It took 12 hours to fire. I stayed up checking the temperature. Adjusting the vents. Watching through the peephole as the glazes melted and set. By morning the kiln had cooled enough to open. I waited until everyone was home. We opened it together. The mugs were beautiful. Each one unique. Sarah's had a rough texture she'd pressed in with burlap. Linda's were smooth and blue. Maria's had tiny flowers carved around the rim. 2 had cracked in cooling. We set those aside. The rest were perfect. Patricia delivered them to the cafe on Friday. She came back with a check and photos. The mugs were displayed on a shelf behind the counter. A small sign said handmade by the women of Stillwater House. Sarah cried when she saw the photo. She said she'd never been part of something people wanted. That weekend I taught everyone how to keep records. We made a ledger. Dated each entry. Wrote down materials cost. Labor hours. Sale price. I told them documentation mattered. When you build something you have to prove it exists. You have to show the work. Jennifer understood immediately. She'd had no proof of her marriage contributions. No record of the years she'd managed the household. Raised the children. Enabled her husband's career. She said from now on she'd document everything. Every hour. Every skill. Every bit of worth. By March 3 more women had joined us. The house was full. We had a waiting list again. Patricia found another property. A small house 2 blocks away. She asked if I'd consider teaching there too. I said yes. Tuesdays at Stillwater. Thursdays at the new house they called Second Wind. The work was the same. Clay and patience. Hands learning to trust themselves. Women learning they could make something from nothing. One Thursday in late March a young woman came. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her name was Rachel. She sat in the corner and watched for an hour. Didn't touch the clay. Didn't speak. At the end I asked if she wanted to try. She shook her head. She said she didn't know if she was allowed. I told her she didn't need permission. Not here. Not for this. She came back the next week. Still didn't touch anything. Just watched. The third week she asked if she could wedge some clay. Just feel it. Not make anything. I gave her a piece. She worked it for 30 minutes. Pressing and folding. Her shoulders slowly relaxed. The fourth week she made a bowl. Small and careful. When it was done she held it like something precious. She asked if she could keep it. I told her it was already hers. She'd made it. No one could take it away. In April the journalist came. Hannah Pierce from the Denver Post. Young. Maybe 30. She carried a recorder and a notebook. Patricia had arranged the interview. She thought Stillwater's story should be told. I wasn't sure, but Hannah asked good questions. She didn't want drama. She wanted to understand how we worked. Why it mattered. I told her about documentation. About teaching women to keep records. To prove their worth. To make their names difficult to erase. I told her about the pottery. How it teaches patience. How it proves you can start over. How clay forgives everything if you're willing to try again. She asked about my son. I kept it simple. I said some relationships couldn't be repaired. But that didn't mean you stopped building. She asked what my will said. I told her Stillwater would continue. The house would stay with the collective. My journals would go to Nora. For any woman who needed legal precedent. And Harold's measuring spoon. The pewter one he called our North Star. That would go to Rachel. The girl who'd learned to believe she was allowed. Hannah asked why. I said because some things are meant to be passed on. Not to family. But to people who understand their weight. The article came out in May. It was titled The Woman Who Wouldn't Be Edited. I didn't read it at first. Sarah brought home a copy from the diner. She insisted I look. There was a photo of me at the wheel. My hands centered on clay. The window behind me showing the garden. The article told the story. The locked door. The court case. The donation. The women learning to rebuild. It ended with a quote I barely remembered giving. Something about names. About making yourself difficult to erase. About documentation as survival. The paper sat on the kitchen table for a week. Women picked it up and read it. Then read it again. Patricia said donations had started coming in. Small amounts mostly. $20. $50. But they added up. She said the waiting list had grown too. Women calling from across the state. Asking if there was room. Asking if hope was still possible. I told her hope was always possible. But it required work. And documentation. And the willingness to start over. One evening in late May I sat in the garden. The beds were planted now. Tomato seedlings. Lettuce. Basil and cilantro. The air smelled like earth and growth. The mountains were still snow-capped in the distance. Maria's daughter came out and sat beside me. She asked if I missed my old house. I told her this was my house now. She asked what about my son. I said some people make choices that close doors. And sometimes you have to let the door stay closed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if that made me sad. I told her the truth. Sometimes. But mostly it made me free. She nodded like she understood. Then she showed me a drawing she'd made. A house with flowers. Women standing in the garden. All of them smiling. She'd written Stillwater House across the top. In careful purple crayon. I asked if I could keep it. She said yes. That night I pinned it to the wall in my room. next to Harold's letter, next to the article, next to photos of pottery and gardens and new beginnings. I looked at the wall and saw documentation. Proof that I'd survived. Proof that I'd rebuilt. Proof that my name hadn't been erased. I turned off the light. I listened to the house settle. Footsteps above. Water in pipes. The sound of women making homes. This was what mattered, not what I'd lost, but what I'd built from the wreckage. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The article brought attention we hadn't asked for. Good attention mostly, but attention nonetheless. In June, a television station called. They wanted to film a segment. Human interest piece for the evening news. Patricia asked what I thought. I said no at first. I didn't want to be a story. I wanted to do the work. But she reminded me that visibility meant funding. Funding meant more women helped. More houses, more rooms, more chances. So I said yes. The crew came on a Tuesday. 3 people with cameras and lights. They filmed the pottery class. They interviewed Sarah and Linda. They filmed Maria's children playing in the garden. The reporter asked me the same questions Hannah had asked. About my son. About the court case. About why I'd given away my house. I gave the same answers. But shorter this time. Television wants sound bites, not whole truths. The segment aired on Thursday. I didn't watch it, but Patricia recorded it. She showed me later. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. My face on screen, my hands on clay, my voice explaining why documentation mattered. It felt strange seeing myself. Like watching someone else's life. The phone rang more after that. Donations increased. More women called asking for space. Churches offered meeting rooms. A hardware store donated garden supplies. By July we had enough funding to lease a 3rd house. This one near downtown, closer to bus lines, easier for women to get to jobs. Patricia asked if I'd help set it up. I said yes. We named it Safe Harbor. Because harbor means protection, means a place to dock after rough water. I taught pottery there on Saturday mornings. The house filled quickly. 5 women by the end of the month. One of them was older than me. Her name was Dorothy. She was 73. Her daughter had taken control of her accounts. Had moved her into a facility against her will. Had sold her house without permission. Dorothy had escaped with help from a social worker. Now she was rebuilding at 73. Learning that age doesn't erase rights. She came to pottery class every week. Her hands were arthritic. The clay was hard for her to work. But she kept trying. She made small pinch pots. Simple forms. She said they reminded her of her grandmother, who'd made pottery in Kentucky. Back when Dorothy was young. I asked if she'd ever tried it before. She said no. Her husband hadn't allowed hobbies. Too expensive. Too messy. Too much time away from duties. She'd been married for 50 years. Widowed for 2. And her daughter had stepped right into control. Dorothy said it was like trading one prison for another. Until she found Safe Harbor. In August, the first started archiving all the documents from my case. From other women's cases, court orders, police reports, medical records, photos, journals. June helped me organize everything. She was a retired librarian. Precise and methodical. She understood how information needed to be stored. We set up a small office at Stillwater. Filing cabinets. A scanner. A computer with encrypted backup. Every woman who wanted could add her story. Her documentation. Her proof. Some women wrote everything down. Pages and pages. Others just contributed a single document. A court order, a medical report, a photograph. June cataloged it all. She created an index. She backed up everything twice. She treated each story like it was precious. Because it was. One afternoon in September I received a voicemail. From Colin. I almost deleted it without listening. My thumb hovered over the button. But something made me press play. His voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. He said he didn't know who he was anymore. He said he hoped I was okay. He said he was sorry for things he couldn't name. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was confusion wrapped in regret. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some doors need to stay closed. Not forever maybe, but for now. Patricia asked if I was all right. I told her I was. She asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said there wasn't much to say. Colin was trying to find his way back. But he was looking in the wrong direction. He was looking backward, at what had been. I was looking forward, at what could still be built. Those were different paths. Maybe they'd cross again someday. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way I'd be fine. In October we held an open house. All 3 locations. Stillwater, Second Wind, Safe Harbor. People came to see what we'd built. Neighbors, donors, social workers, women looking for help. We displayed pottery on tables. Bowls and cups and vases. Each one marked with initials and dates. Each one proof of hands that had learned to create. We served coffee and cookies. Maria had baked for 2 days. Her children handed out flyers. About the collective. About how to help. About where to call. A woman came up to me. Middle-aged. Nervous hands. She asked if this place was real. I told her it was. She asked if there was room. I told her there was always room. We'd find space somehow. She started crying. Right there in the kitchen. Sarah brought her tissues and water. Patricia took her to the office. An hour later she'd filled out paperwork. She'd be moving into Safe Harbor on Monday. That was the day's count. 4 new women. 7 serious inquiries. Donations totaling $3,000. And 1 woman crying in relief. Because someone had said yes. There's room. You're welcome here. By November the days were short again. Dark by 5. Cold settling in. I spent more time in my room. Not hiding. Just resting. I was 71 now. The work took more energy than it used to. But I wasn't ready to stop. I updated my will in December. Nora handled it. Everything spelled out clearly. Stillwater House and its sibling properties to the collective. My journals and case files to the archive. For any woman who needed legal precedent. Harold's pewter measuring spoon to Rachel. My pottery wheel to Sarah. My wedding ring melted down and made into something new. Something useful. Something that wasn't about the past. Nora asked if I was sure about Colin. About leaving him nothing. I told her I was certain. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. She nodded and wrote it down. That Christmas we celebrated together. All 3 houses. We rented a community center. Brought food and decorations. Someone found a donated tree. The children hung ornaments. The women sat in groups. Talking and laughing. Some crying too. Because holidays are complicated when you're rebuilding. Dorothy brought photos of her grandmother. The one who'd made pottery in Kentucky. She passed them around. She said this Christmas felt like family. More than her blood family ever had. Maria's daughter gave me a drawing. Another house. More flowers. This one had 3 houses. All connected by a path. She said that was us. All connected. All safe. I hung it in my room that night. Next to the first drawing. Next to Harold's letter. Next to the article. The wall was filling up. With proof. With documentation. With evidence that I hadn't just survived. I'd built something that would outlast me. On New Year's Eve I sat alone in my room. The house was quiet. Everyone had gone to bed early. Tired from celebrating. I looked out at the garden. Covered in snow now. The beds hidden. But not gone. Just waiting. In spring we'd plant again. Tomatoes. Lettuce. Herbs. The cycle would continue. With or without me. I thought about the year. About locked doors and court cases. About clay and beginnings. About women learning their worth. I thought about Colin's voicemail. The one I'd deleted. I didn't regret it. Some distances are necessary. Some silences are kind. I thought about Harold. About the letter that saved me. About his voice reading maps. About the way he'd known I'd need an escape route. I whispered thank you to the dark. To him. To whatever made it possible for me to still be here. The clock struck midnight somewhere. But I didn't hear it. I was already asleep. Dreaming of gardens and pottery wheels. Of hands making something from nothing. Of women who refused to disappear. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. January brought a cold that settled deep. The kind that makes bones ache. The kind that doesn't leave. I woke one morning and couldn't get warm. Even with 2 blankets. Even with the heater running. Sarah knocked on my door at 9. She asked if I was coming to breakfast. I told her I was just tired. She brought me tea anyway. The next day Patricia stopped by. She said I looked pale. She asked when I'd last seen a doctor. I couldn't remember. She made an appointment for me. Thursday at 2. She drove me herself. The doctor was young. Younger than Colin. She listened to my heart. Took my blood pressure. Asked about pain. About energy. About appetite. I told her I was just getting older. She said maybe. But she wanted blood work anyway. The results came back on Monday. Anemia. Low iron. Vitamin deficiencies. Nothing catastrophic. But enough to explain the tiredness. She prescribed supplements. She said to rest more. She said I was pushing too hard. I told her there was work to do. She said the work would still be there. I needed to take care of myself first. I started taking the pills. I started resting in the afternoons. I didn't like it, but I did it. Sarah took over the Tuesday class. She was ready. She knew the techniques. She had patience. She had gentle hands. I watched from the doorway sometimes. She was better than me in some ways. More encouraging. Less strict about perfect form. The women loved her. In February the collective received a grant. $50,000. From a women's foundation in California. They'd read the article. They'd seen the news segment. They wanted to support the work. Patricia called a meeting. All the houses. Everyone who wanted to be part of the decision. We sat in Stillwater's living room. 23 women. Some with children. Some alone. Patricia laid out the options. We could lease another house. We could hire a full-time counselor. We could expand the pottery program. We could build an emergency fund. Everyone had opinions. We talked for 2 hours. We voted on everything. In the end we decided to do all of it. A little of each. Another house. A part-time counselor. More pottery supplies. And $10,000 in the bank for emergencies. Because emergencies always came. The 4th house opened in March. We called it New Ground. Because that's what it was. Fresh soil. A place to plant new seeds. I didn't teach there. Sarah did. She was the pottery teacher now. I was just the one who'd started it. That was fine with me. Better even. Things should outlive their founders. Otherwise they die when you do. One afternoon in April I was working alone. Just me and the wheel. The room was quiet except for the hum. I was making a bowl. Nothing special. Just practicing. Keeping my hands working. The clay centered. I pressed in with my thumbs. The walls rose. Thin and even. Then my hands cramped. Sharp and sudden. The bowl collapsed. I stopped the wheel. I sat looking at the ruined clay. It wasn't the first time my hands had cramped. It had been happening more lately. But this time felt different. Like a door closing. I cleaned up slowly. I washed my hands. I went to my room. I sat on the bed. I looked at my hands. 71 years old. Spotted and thin. Still capable. But not forever. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about time. About how much was left. About what still needed doing. At dawn I made a list. Not of tasks. Of transfers. Skills I needed to pass on. Knowledge that had to move from my head to someone else's. Documentation that needed completing. I spent the next week training Dorothy. She was retired. She had time. And she understood the importance of records. I showed her the filing system. How June had organized everything. How to catalog new documents. How to protect privacy while preserving truth. Dorothy learned quickly. She took notes. She asked good questions. She understood this was more than paperwork. This was memory. This was proof. In May I taught Rachel about the kiln. How to load it. How to monitor temperature. How to adjust for different glazes. She was nervous at first. The kiln was expensive. One mistake could ruin a whole load. But I told her fear was normal. You just had to work through it. We fired 3 loads together. By the 3rd she didn't need my help. Sarah already knew everything about the wheel. About wedging clay. About teaching beginners. But I showed her the business side. How to order supplies. How to price pieces. How to negotiate with shops. She wrote everything down. She created spreadsheets. She was more organized than I'd ever been. By June I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy. And I'd finally set it down. The work would continue. With or without me. That's when the internet noise started. Someone had found the Halloween video. The one of Britney mocking me. It had been sealed with the court records. But someone leaked it. It went viral. That's what Patricia called it. Millions of views in days. People were angry. At Colin. At Britney. Comments flooded their social media. Harsh comments. Mean comments. The kind that dig in and don't let go. Britney's fundraiser was discovered. The one where she'd claimed to be starting over. After losing everything. People called her a liar. Called her worse things. Colin's LinkedIn was found. His employer tagged. People demanded he be fired. Someone made memes. Cruel ones. Funny ones. They spread everywhere. Patricia showed me some of it. She asked if I'd seen. I said no. She asked if I wanted to. I said no. She asked how I felt about it. I told her the truth. I didn't feel good about it. I hadn't wanted this. Public shaming. Internet justice. What I'd wanted was protection. Legal consequences. The return of what was mine. This felt different. This felt like cruelty. Even if it was directed at people who'd been cruel first. Patricia asked if I wanted to make a statement. Tell people to stop. I thought about it. But I realized something. I had no control over this. Just like I'd had no control when they locked me out. The internet would do what it did. People would judge. Consequences would follow. That wasn't my responsibility. I hadn't posted the video. I hadn't started the pile on. I'd just told the truth. In court, where truth is supposed to matter. What happened after wasn't mine to carry. So I told Patricia no. No statement. I would just keep doing the work. In July, Colin called again. I saw his name on the screen. I answered this time. His voice was broken. He said he'd lost his job. Brittany had left him. He was sorry. He was so sorry. I listened without speaking. He said he knew he couldn't fix it. He said he just wanted me to know. He understood now. What he'd done. What he'd lost. I waited until he was finished. Then I spoke. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. But I also wasn't ready. Maybe someday. But not now. I told him to get help. Real help. A therapist. Someone who could walk him through this. I told him I hoped he'd be okay. But I couldn't be the one to make him okay. Then I hung up. I sat holding the phone for a long time. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Or victory. Just sadness. For what could have been. For what would never be. That evening I walked in the garden. The tomatoes were heavy on the vines. The lettuce had bolted in the heat. The basil smelled like summer. Maria's daughter was picking cherry tomatoes. She showed me her basket. Red and yellow ones. Still warm from the sun. She asked if I was sad. I asked why she thought that. She said I looked far away. I told her sometimes far away was okay. Sometimes you needed distance to see clearly. She nodded. Then she handed me a tomato. Still on the vine. She said we could plant the seeds. For next year. I held that tomato. Warm and perfect. A small red promise. That night I added one more item to my will. The garden at Stillwater. To be maintained in perpetuity. As long as the house stood. There would always be tomatoes. Always something growing. Always proof that life continues. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. August brought heat that shimmered off the pavement. The garden needed watering twice a day. The tomatoes split if you waited too long. Everything grew fast and wild. I spent most mornings in my room. The coolest place in the house. I worked on final documentation. Letters to be opened later. Instructions for Dorothy. Notes for Sarah about glaze recipes. Small things that mattered. One morning Patricia knocked. She had someone with her. A woman from the state. Department of Social Services. They wanted to do a feature. About elder abuse prevention. About Stillwater as a model. About my story. I was tired of my story. But I understood it wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to whoever needed it. So I said yes. We met the following week. 3 women from the department. They asked questions for 2 hours. About warning signs. About documentation. About legal options. About rebuilding. I answered everything. But I also told them what the system missed. How long it took to get help. How many times I'd been dismissed. How close I came to giving up. They wrote it all down. They said they'd use it for training. For caseworkers. For judges. For anyone who worked with vulnerable adults. I told them to add one thing. Age doesn't erase autonomy. Being old doesn't mean being incompetent. Sometimes the most dangerous abuse comes from family. From people who think they know better. From people who forget you're still a person. They nodded. They added it to their notes. In September I taught my last pottery class. I didn't announce it as my last. I just knew. 7 women came. Some regulars. Some new. We worked in comfortable silence. The wheel hummed. Hands shaped clay. The afternoon light came through the window golden and thick. At the end I showed them something. Harold's pewter measuring spoon. The one he'd called our North Star. I told them about Harold. About how he'd known to protect me. About the letter he'd left. About the amendment that saved my life. I said this spoon represented direction. When everything else was uncertain. When you couldn't see the way forward. You needed something that pointed true north. I told them I was giving it to Rachel. She was sitting in the corner. She looked up surprised. I said she'd learned to trust her hands. To believe she was allowed. Now I wanted her to help others find their direction. Rachel cried. She held the spoon like it was sacred. Maybe it was. That evening I sat in the garden. The sun was setting behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple. Dorothy came out and sat beside me. She asked if I was feeling all right. I said I was tired but content. She asked about the spoon. Why I'd given it away. I told her some things need to be passed on. Before it's too late. Before you can't let go. She understood. She was 74 now. She knew about timing. About windows closing. We sat until the stars came out. Neither of us speaking. Just being. In October the leaves turned. Gold and red against blue sky. The air smelled like wood smoke and apples. I went to see Nora. We finalized everything. The will. The trust documents. Letters of instruction. She asked if I was expecting something. I said no. Just being prepared. She looked at me carefully. She asked if I was sick. I said not sick exactly. Just aware. She nodded. She understood. Before I left she hugged me. She said I'd changed her life. The prom dress. The kindness. The example. I told her she'd changed mine too. By being there when I needed a warrior. On Halloween I thought about the party. The one 2 years ago. Brittany in the gray wig. Colin's voice announcing Maggie the mummy. It felt like a different lifetime. Like something that happened to someone else. Maria's children dressed up this year. A ghost and a superhero. They went trick-or-treating in the neighborhood. They came back with pillowcases full of candy. We sat around the kitchen table. Sorting and trading. Sarah pretended to steal the good chocolate. The children shrieked with laughter. This was what Halloween should be. Joy. Safety. Children being children, not cruelty dressed up as humor. In November I started giving things away. Not everything, just things that had purpose for someone else. My good winter coat to Jennifer. My recipe box to Maria. Books to the library. Tools to the workshop. Each thing I gave away made the room feel lighter. Dorothy asked if I was planning to leave. I said everyone leaves eventually. Better to decide what happens to your things than to leave it for others to sort through. She started doing the same. Giving her sister the jewelry. Giving her granddaughter the photo albums. Keeping only what she needed. We became experts in letting go. December came with snow, early and heavy. The garden disappeared again, white and clean. Waiting for spring. I spent Christmas Day in my room. Not sad. Not lonely. Just quiet. The house was full of celebration. Laughter from the living room. Children's voices. The smell of ham and sweet potatoes. I could hear it all. I was part of it. But I also needed this. This stillness. This silence. In the evening Sarah knocked. She brought me a plate. She sat on the edge of my bed. She told me about her first Christmas here. 2 years ago. How scared she'd been. How broken. Now she was teaching pottery. She had her own apartment downtown. She was going to community college, studying art education. She said she wouldn't be who she was without this place. Without me. I told her she'd done the work herself. I just held the door open. She said that's what mattered most. Someone holding the door. Someone saying you're welcome here. On New Year's Eve I wrote my final letter. Not to anyone specific. Just to whoever found it. I wrote about locks. About how many kinds there are. The kind on doors. The kind in hearts. The kind in systems that fail people. I wrote about keys. About documentation. About making yourself difficult to erase. About proving your existence. About leaving a record. I wrote about clay. About how it teaches you everything you need. That you can start over. That mistakes can be wedged back and reformed. That your hands remember even when your mind forgets. I wrote about Harold. About North Stars. About people who love you enough to plan for your future. Even when they won't be there. I wrote about Colin. About forgiveness that looks like distance. About boundaries that are actually mercy. About letting people go so they can find themselves. I wrote about gardens. About planting seeds you might not harvest. About trusting the cycle. About knowing something will grow even after you're gone. I sealed the letter. I put it with my will. That night I stood at my window. The snow reflected moonlight. The garden beds were buried but still there. The house was warm and full. I thought about the key that wouldn't turn. 2 years ago, standing on that porch in the rain. I thought about the motel room. The list I'd made. Change everything. I had. Not just my circumstances, but my understanding of what mattered. Not property. Not blood ties. Not the approval of people who'd forgotten your worth. What mattered was this. A house full of women rebuilding. A garden that would bloom again. Records that proved we existed. We resisted. We survived. I wasn't erased. I was documented. I was witnessed. I was real. And this house. These women. This work. It would continue. I turned from the window. I got into bed. I pulled Harold's quilt up to my chin. The one his grandmother had made. The one that smelled like lavender and thyme. I closed my eyes. I thought about still water. About what comes after the rapids. After the chaos and the fear. The quiet. The peace. The knowing you made it through. Outside the house was silent. Inside my room was warm. I am not erased, I whispered to the dark. I am rewritten. And this time nobody can lock me out. I slept. Deeper than I had in years. Dreaming of gardens and pottery wheels. Of hands making something from nothing. Of women who learned they could survive. And then learned they could build. When morning came the sun would rise. The snow would sparkle. The house would wake. Coffee would brew. Children would laugh. Women would gather at the table. The work would continue. With or without me. As it should. As it must. As I'd always planned.